Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition of Meet, Act, and Part. And we've got a very special guest tonight that we're going to introduce here in a moment. I want to introduce ourselves as our co-hosts. I am Greg Knott.
Aaron Laners. And Roger Van Gordon is feeling under the weather, so we're wishing Roger a speedy recovery.
Yeah, he's kind of been on assignment for us. He has been at the Conference of Grandmasters, and he was at Masonic Week. And so he is helping us line up some great guests for the future. But tonight, we've got a super guest, and that is Steve Harrison. Steve has been a friend for many, many years of Darren and I. He is one of the emeritus contributors to the Midnight Freemasons and a whole bunch of other stuff. And he is going to be here to talk about a special project that he has just rolled out. And I literally just got mine out of the mailbox today, so it couldn't have been any hotter. So with that, Steve, what I'll do, Steve, ask you to introduce yourself Masonically, and then we'll introduce specifically the topic of why you're joining us tonight.
Well, Masonically, I live in Missouri. I am a past master of Liberty Lodge, which is in the Kansas City metropolitan area, and I'm a member of a bunch of bodies over here: Shrine, York Rite bodies, Scottish Rite, and fairly active participant in especially the York and Scottish Rite. And I don't know, just call me brother.
There you go, exactly. So, Steve, is it fair to say that you have a deep interest in Masonic history, research, and that has translated into numerous writings you have done, both short and long, over the last decade or more?
That pretty much says it all right there. This is my fifth book, and they've all been about Masonic, I guess you could say Masonic history. This one's a little different. And when I was very active with the Midnight Freemasons, I did a lot of that too, and have produced some videos for another podcast that I've been on. And I would say the majority have been kind of Masonic history oriented.
Yeah. So the one we're going to talk about tonight is you've just released. It's titled The Imperfect Storm. And you had taken, I remember when you told us 3+ years ago, you were going to take a deliberate break from Midnight Freemasons and some of those other things because you were working on a special project. And I know you did lots of research, and we'll cover that. But you've kind of come to the capstone with that in the physical release, even though I know I'm holding it up, even though I know we're only audio. It's a beautiful book, what I've seen. Like I say, we just got it today, but you've done a ton of work on it. And why don't you introduce it? Because it's on a well-known subject, but as we go through tonight, you had a different why as to how and why you picked this particular subject, because it's not the first book written on it. However, and Darren and I are familiar with it because we've helped Steve a little bit in the end. It's a topic that needed another set of eyes and deserved, I think, a deeper look than other publications have done. So, Steve, with that, why don't you introduce your subject and your book?
Greg, it's yet another book on the Morgan affair. I, first of all, have had an abiding interest since I first read about it as a young Mason, and I learned some things about it along the way that made me feel that we really have not dug as deeply into it as we possibly could, especially with some of the things that we have access to today that people that came before us, even as late as, mid to late 20th century, did not have. So I was sensitive about the fact that a lot of people might say, well, who needs another book about the Morgan affair? But I also knew that, as of today, we are within the 200th anniversary of this thing happening, and that I felt like I needed to cover all of the aspects of the Morgan affair. I got some new information about the Morgan affair that I thought might fit in. I wanted to cover the causes. In other words, to put it bluntly, how was it that Masonry sank so low that we were admitting people into the organization who would be robbers, arsonists, liars, thieves, and kidnappers for sure, and even perhaps murderers? how did we go down that road? And then what effect did the Morgan affair have on American history, even down to us today?
So briefly, I'll give the shortest version of the Morgan affair. And then if I'm not quite all there, I'll have you. So this took place in New York, state of New York. William Morgan was allegedly a member of the fraternity, and he was going to expose the rituals of the fraternity. And of course, keep in mind, this is in the early 1800s, and at a time when written and printed materials were still a premium. So the fact that somebody was going to expose the ritual, unlike today where you can, find it a million places online, it was sort of an outrageous thought that was going to happen. And so Mr. Morgan disappeared, and he was allegedly murdered. And the short version of it is it was blamed on the Freemasons. And that caused a whole firestorm of activity that we'll get into a little bit here. And so the question is, I think, Steve, where your book really is the focus, is was he murdered? Did he disappear? Who did it? And those kinds of things, right?
You will never drag that out of me, because that's what the book is about.
Right. Yeah.
I do not want to, shall we say, deprive the reader of the roller coaster ride that this book is going to take you through. The book is a mystery book, and it's a true crime book. And that's why for the first one of my books ever, I'm also promoting it outside of Freemasonry. So you have to read the book to find out what happened to Morgan. It's that simple.
Yeah. And this book, part of the discussion, Steve, we had, you, Darren, and I, and some other friends, you did a deep dive on the research of the materials of this. And as I flipped through it, this book is, it's not only a mystery, but it's based on facts that Steve has dug up, and he has documented the sources of those facts. And those alone are worth, infinite amount of goodwill, and especially to future researchers, because, Steve, obviously we all build on the work of others when we're doing, research. So this book, and I can't wait to I've read some summaries that Steve has shared, short summaries. I can't wait to dive into it. But what also impresses me is already the amount of footnotes I see, or, and other, notations and things that tell us where you're getting this information. So I want to back up a little bit more. You've written on Oak Island and a variety of other, the Grand Lodge of Missouri, I think, and the other fellow's name's escaping me, where you went through his letters and things from the Missouri. How did you end up on William Morgan?
20 years ago, I had never heard about William Morgan, and when I finally did, I started reading about him. And I read an article that, of course, there are many theories about what happened to him, but this particular theory said that he had gone to the Caribbean and that there was a series of letters that detailed his life in the Caribbean, written by a man who was married to Morgan's granddaughter. And it just hit me that, number one, if we could find those letters, it would tell us a lot about Morgan, and it would also, in this particular instance, probably lead us to family members on the Batavia side and on the Caribbean side, and that if we did a little digging, we could figure out if those two families were related and maybe get a clue as to whether or not that really was William Morgan down there. Yeah. These letters were super detailed. There were a series of 5 letters. 4 letters from a man by the name of I. Dwight Hunter, and 1 letter back to him from the Grand Master of Michigan, whom he had written to. And in addition to that, when I finally got my hands on these letters, there were a lot more materials too. So I started out looking for those letters in particular. They said that they were located in the Bentley Library in the University of Michigan campus, and I contacted them, and they said, no, we don't have them. They searched, didn't have them. And I was at a dead end. I tried to contact the Grand Lodge of Michigan. I didn't go through proper channels, but I don't think they would have had anything either, and I just kind of let it drop. Then during the pandemic, sitting around one day with nothing left to do. That's probably not too accurate, but I decided to give the Bentley Library a call again, or I went to their website, and by this time, they had their entire catalog online. And I went through it myself. Now, this is the catalog, not the documents. I went through it myself, and I found the letters that I was looking for. That generated a trip to Michigan. I went through all those materials, found more than I thought I was looking for. And once I was done going through them, I said, there's a book in this. And we took it from there.
Yeah. And I think regardless of the topic, what you just described is a great example of there's always more to the story. And as someone, I worked in another Big Ten, large academic library, there was a lot of our stuff, even though majority of it was cataloged, there's still things we would have that just, you just didn't get to them. And so, the first answer sometimes, if it's no, I think your dogged determination said, no, I'm sure they're there. And so, you keep looking and digging and you find the right person or, I think it's a real testament. If people are doing research and you get to a roadblock, don't give up because there's, it doesn't mean you're over. And especially now as technology has advanced the last 20 years and more things are, scanned online or indexed or whatever they are, they're there. Sometimes it is kind of a wild goose chase, isn't it, Steve, to track them down. Like you say, all of a sudden, you not only found the 5 letters, but many more things that really have been kind of the foundation of your book.
Right. Those letters just stayed in my mind, and I knew they were probably somewhere, and it did pique my interest in the Morgan affair. So during the interim time between I thought they weren't there and that we found them, I did a couple videos on Morgan and wrote a couple of articles. And, now I'm just kind of sorry in a way that it took me 15 years to go back and look again. But I don't know when they got their catalog online, and maybe they had just done something like that. Yes, but it definitely kept it in my mind.
And the irony of all of this is my boss, when we were at the University of Illinois, he was the dean of libraries. He used to be at University of Michigan, and a lot of his area was in digitization and things. So maybe John Wilkin, if you'll ever listen to this, I'll give you just a little bit of credit because he's a guy that he was a real pace setter in the digitization of things. So, wow, is that not a small world? I'm going to pass it over to Darren and see, Darren, what do you think about? I know both of us just got the book, but you were also instrumental in working with Steve on some of his ideas.
Yeah, I, as you mentioned, just got the book. Can't wait to really dig into it. Going to try to read it over the weekend. I think, though, Steve, one of the things that kind of fascinates me about kind of the case you've laid out in the book is that basically there were all of these things happening in the background that kind of led up to the Morgan affair occurring. And you kind of go into, even how the disintegration or this fracture of the Grand Lodge of England into the ancients and moderns may have played a role in setting conditions in the United States to allow the anti-Masonic movement to kind of gain traction. I guess one of the questions I have, obviously history's set, but do you think that if it wasn't Morgan, it would have been somebody else eventually, and that there would have been some sort of catalyst for the rise in anti-Masonic fervor that occurred during this time period? Or do you think it was because it was Morgan that, and just the sensationalism of everything around that case, that added to the fire, if you will?
In the back of the book, I have a little section in which I kind of speculate. What if there had been no Morgan affair? Or what if everything would have been the same as it was, but it's just William Morgan didn't come along? And anti-Masonry was growing a lot back then. And about the only conclusion I can come to is, yeah, there would have been more anti-Masonry as time went by. But I do not think it would have had nearly the impact, especially in the United States, where it almost brought Freemasonry completely down. In fact, in Illinois, it did bring Freemasonry completely down. And in Missouri, the chapter closed completely down. And it just affected Freemasonry so much and lingered for the entire century that it might not have gone that far, but anti-Masonry was on the rise, and I think we were going to have a period of it, but not that would have affected Freemasonry and, in fact, American politics so much as it really did.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point as well, because you really did have politicians that had identities as prominent Freemasons. Of course, we have our beloved George Washington, who shows up in every lodge room, even though that he was raised what we would consider in modern parlance irregularly, because his lodge didn't have a charter when he was raised to the sublime degree. You had kind of, along with the expansion to the west, the expansion of Freemasonry as well. And as towns got set up, one of the first organizations that were set up in towns were often the Masonic lodges, sometimes even before the local governments were set up. So I think that you probably saw a lot of people that were maybe on the outside looking in, thinking, it's the same thing that, let's face it, anti-Masonry really hasn't changed all that much from Morgan's time to modern times, that there's this belief that we are, meeting in secret, doing all of these secret things in our meetings, and we're up to no good, basically, because we won't allow people to come in that aren't Masons.
I will tell you, in relation to your question, there were big events that happened along the way. In the second chapter of the book, we just kind of take a look at where anti-Masonry came from and what state it was in just prior to the Morgan Affair. And several years before the Morgan Affair happened, there was a huge incident that a bunch of non-Masons found out that a guy wanted to join the Masons, and they thought it would be a joke to set up a mock Masonic initiation. They wound up with all of their effects and trying to scare the heck out of this guy. For special lighting, they had a burning plate of fluid. And when they tried to scare him, he didn't get that scared, so they threw the fluid on him. And obviously he caught fire, and 3 days later he died. And it came out that Benjamin Franklin had been told about this, and so he became involved in it. So there was a death involved there, and it just did not cause the uproar that the Morgan Affair caused. And then right around the time of the Morgan Affair, if it had not occurred, there was I guess you would call it a family that was involved in, shall we say, kind of a polyamorous affair, and a teenage girl was raped, and the guy was imprisoned for it. There was speculation that he died in prison, but everybody accused the Masons of sneaking him out of jail and replacing his body with some other body, and that caused a big stir in Vermont. The thing about it, though, is the guy that was sentenced to prison was not a Mason. So the Masons weren't involved in this thing, but they were blamed for it, and that did not go national. However, it happened in Vermont, which became so anti-Masonic, it's the only state that gave electoral votes to the anti-Masonic presidential candidate. So these things happened, and the Morgan Affair, though, was just so big that it really caused this backlash.
I mean, it seemed to touch every part of the country, of what was then constituted the United States, both our territories and the existing states at that time. It almost seems unreal that it would be so much fervor that it would create that national storm. Like you mentioned, even in Illinois, our Grand Lodge disappeared, and yet to rise to the creation of a third political party or a third party. It wasn't the only third party, and to have an impact directly on the elections of, probably some local offices, but definitely the national presidential race and things. I mean, I say that in the context, not that we'll get into so much of today's, current events, but you do start to see the parallels between, some of those things that create fervor in groups of people enough to get organized to do that third party. In this case, they're blaming the Freemasons. And, will history repeat itself? I don't know. It has over time, in various things, but it's, what was it, a 12 year run for that party before it finally disappeared into history. But that, did a lot of, arguably, you could say it did a lot of damage, not only to the fraternity, but to other things as well.
It literally was pervasive over the entire 19th century. Now, they're not the same event, and I'm not really trying to compare them, but in terms of, shall we say, people knowing about them, it was almost like people knew about it then the way people know about 9/11 today. Everybody knows about it. It was in the papers, and let's face it, it was kind of tabloid stuff, and newspapers just kind of eat that up. But one of the things that is kind of strange to me, it was so prevalent in the 19th century, and today almost nobody knows about it.
Yeah. It's Steve, I'm curious, you came to Homer, where Darren and I are members, as you were kind of putting the trying to finish this book up, met with a friend of ours on some expertise he had on research. But, describe a little bit. You talked about the Michigan research you did, but what other, I'll call it adventures or maybe a rabbit hole, did you go down? Because you were using things that like you said, 20 years ago wouldn't have existed. Not only things online, but people had talked about DNA and some of those genealogical connections. What were some of the things you found, and what were some of the modern tools 20 years ago, if you'd have written this book, wouldn't have been possible?
Well, you mentioned them. First of all, we did use DNA to try to compare the families of especially Caribbean Morgan and New York Morgan. So we did, and when I came to talk to you and Darren, we were trying to do the same thing, but we had a different way that we wanted to do it. And it just really didn't work out. So yes, I eventually wound up hiring a DNA company to do some deep research into the Morgan affair. The internet, of course, is another tool that people haven't had forever, and it really did make searching for, the hallmark of writing is original documents, or maybe I should say the Rosetta Stone. So I think I was able to find that stuff a lot faster because of the internet. And then, of course, I didn't have to travel to Boston to read the Boston Globe from the 1800s. I found it on the internet. I could research all of those stories, most of them anyway, without having to leave my home. The letters about Morgan and the Caribbean being one of the exceptions. The rest of it was just, I took 2 trips to New York to do some research there. I had a lead on some Morgan materials that were supposed to be locked in a safe in a Masonic lodge. And so I went up there and we scoured that safe for those documents, took photographs of everything that was in there. And that kind of is it. I mean, the modern stuff, internet and the DNA analysis, and the rest of it was just some pretty, hard digging.
Yeah. So just for a little bit of context of the overarching Morgan story, part of it is, did he die in New York and the Masons did it, or did he escape? And one of those places that he allegedly may have went was the Caribbean. And so that's why you were in searching these different locations, was because that's actually part of the mystery of where he went. And then as you made contact with those, as you said, like the Caribbean descendants and maybe others, that's where the DNA and things were started to factor in, because you were kind of following his alleged travels from one place to the other and trying to, because that's an important part of, the mystery in itself.
Absolutely. I tried to follow it as much as I could. We had even maybe planned a trip to the Caribbean. When I say we, I probably would have asked you. I don't remember if I asked you guys if you'd go or not, but we had some good friends who
you did.
Not only were willing to go, they were chomping at the bit to go, but it would have just been immensely expensive. I didn't want to go down there alone, and it's on the United States do not travel list. So we tried to find other ways, and one of those other ways was to come and talk to you and Darren and see if we could, explore something there.
Though, in a way, I would have relished the trip if Darren and I could have went, because then I would have had an international intern.
No,
Darren, I would have let him put it on his resume. So anyway, Darren, let me pass it to you and see what other questions you're thinking about for Steve.
One of the I think Freemasons probably know this, and obviously those who are members of the Church of Latter-day Saints know this, but one of the things that kind of fascinates me out of the Morgan affair is the fact that Morgan's widow ended up becoming one of Joseph Smith's wives. And I guess the question I had is, did Morgan know Joseph Smith or know his family? I know they're all kind of in the same area of New York, originated from the same area of New York. I was just curious if you knew how she got, I guess, connected with Joseph Smith, if there was some sort of pre-existing relationship.
I'm not sure if Morgan ever knew Joseph Smith or not. There were indications in some of the Morgan literature that I followed that Morgan actually helped put together the Book of Mormon, and that he worked with an assistant by the name of Cowdery. I forget his first name, who was also Joseph Smith's assistant. Really couldn't follow that through to any concrete documentation or not. If Morgan was working with Cowdery, then yes, he probably knew Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith kind of got his start in that area. At some point, obviously, his wife, Lucinda, got to know Joseph Smith. She married a man by the name of George Harris once Morgan went missing. And then they became Mormons, or at least followers of Joseph Smith, so she clearly knew him, and they all moved to Nauvoo, Illinois. I won't go too deeply into that. It is controversial to say that Morgan's wife married Joseph Smith. However, the Mormons look at marriage differently than, say, we all look at marriage. I think she clearly had an affair with him, and then the Mormon Church sealed Joseph Smith and Lucinda Morgan in 1846. The thing about that is Joseph Smith died in 1844. But there is documentation on that, the fact they were sealed in 1846, and they were sealed again, I guess, just to make sure, in 1899. So whatever your definition of marriage is, that's the story.
Yeah, Greg, I think it was right before the pandemic, took a field trip after a morning session at Grand Lodge to Nauvoo to see the Mormon sites there, and they've erected just a beautiful Mormon temple there in Nauvoo. It's just really fascinating, the tie-ins even with that religion and Freemasonry here in Illinois. The lodge in Nauvoo at one time was the largest lodge in Illinois. They, however, decided upon themselves to basically do what is considered a modern innovation and have degree classes. So they were raising Masons left and right, to the point that the Grand Lodge, they were under dispensation. The Grand Lodge of Illinois yanked their charter, and then they just continued kind of what we would consider a clandestine Grand Lodge, raising Masons. Now, of course, all of that ended with when Joseph Smith was killed. And Brigham Young at that point, I think, kind of put the kibosh on the tie between Freemasonry and the Mormon religion at that point. Really, it's really fascinating, just the different ties if you go down that rabbit hole between even the Mormon temple ritual and what I would consider it borrowed probably more from the Royal Arch ritual than Blue Lodge ritual.
We also have a Mormon settlement that's probably about 20 miles from my house that not too many people know about. There's not much left of it now. My wife and I took a trip out there on a very cold day recently and just looked at it, but no structures or anything like that, but they've got the cornerstones of the building there. I forget the name of it, but I know they were there for a while once they left Nauvoo.
Yeah.
Her story is, it's really worth studying too.
I mean, all of this just, I think, illustrates how intertwined all these events are with American history, even as we've kind of alluded to already, clear up to the present day. I mean, it's just, so I think, Steve, again, by bringing this story forward, and as you mentioned, you're going to, publicize it, push it, market it to more than just our Masonic circles, because there's a real lesson for anybody that's interested in U.S. history to pick up this book and be able to see where in 2025 it's still a relevant story all the way through that through line.
This event had a profound effect on American history. It definitely had an effect on every president from Andrew Jackson to Millard Fillmore, and maybe even beyond that. And they never elected an anti-Masonic president from the anti-Masonic party. But I think two examples, William Henry Harrison, no relation, was very anti-Masonic, and when he won the presidency, the anti-Masons were thrilled. And they knew now they had a person in the White House who they could work with. And then, of course, as I said in the book, he double-crossed them. He died. And so Tyler followed him, and they couldn't work with him quite so much. But if you want to ever say we had an anti-Masonic president, I think Millard Fillmore really fills the bill. And so how that played out in terms of his policies and things like that, I didn't go too deeply into. But, and the story of how the anti-Masonic party grew, we don't look at them as a great success nationally. They only got 7 electoral votes, but they had some real successes in the individual states. Again, especially Vermont, where that rape occurred, that just set people off of Freemasonry like crazy. So the anti-Masonic party did, in fact, have a pretty big effect on American history.
One of the, as Steve mentioned, he's from Missouri, and the foreword of this book has a very strong Missouri connection. It's the foreword's written by Clifton Truman Daniel, who's the grandson of U.S. 33rd President Harry S. Truman. And I just want to read just a little bit here because it's kind of funny. And Brother Daniel writes towards the end of his foreword, "It's a good story, equal parts mystery and history, and told well in these pages, and yet it's a tempest in a teapot. Books on Masonic ritual had been published 100 years before Morgan even thought of doing so. Years ago, a reporter asked my grandfather, former Grand Master of Masons of Missouri, and U.S. President Harry S. Truman about the Morgan affair and the Morgan Masonic secrets, and President Truman responded, 'If the Masons have any secrets,' Grandpa said, 'I'll be damned if I know what they are.'" And so I think that here you go, a guy, the most powerful man in the world, kind of trying to just quiet these silly, skeptics and things like that, and so it's, that's the through line. So that's a very special opportunity to have his grandson write that forward for your book.
Clifton was very, very kind to do it. He's right. It was a tempest in a teapot, and that's where the title came from, really, because, we hear about the perfect storm where you have all of these things coming together, and there's just going to be the worst storm you ever saw. And if you actually remove one of those elements of that storm, you're still going to have a pretty big storm.
Yeah.
It's an imperfect storm because it came serially. There was just one bad decision after another on the part of the Masons. And if they had just at any one point just backed off a little, this would never have happened. And in fact,
right, go ahead.
I was going to say, there are a couple maybe heroes in the book, but one of them is DeWitt Clinton. After they confiscated Morgan's documents, his manuscript, they took them to DeWitt Clinton, who governor of New York, who was also the grand high priest of the chapter in New York, and I'm sorry, nationally. And they thought he was the person that should have these. And when Clinton heard what they were doing, he said, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to free Morgan, because at the time he was being held at Fort Niagara, and I want you to pay all of his debts so he is a free man and give him back his manuscripts. In other words, DeWitt Clinton kind of gave the Masonic answer. They did not obey him, and it's just one of those things. If they would have just backed off right then, we would not know who William Morgan was. It would have just all dried up. There were other Masonic exposés out there, and none of them caused the trouble that this one caused.
Darren's a student of history and politics, and he and I, of course, we talk about stuff all the time. I mean, Darren, when you look at this story over the long history of the U.S., where do you, if you had to rank its importance, there's no magical ranking to it, but what are your thoughts on the weighted impact of this, of the Morgan affair and what it left us?
I think we still feel its impact, honestly. And I think that there are certain events in history that kind of have these, it's almost like, you take a pebble and you drop a pebble in a pond and the rings of the water spreads out from where that stone is dropped. And I think, the Morgan affair is kind of one of those events where you still, I think, have this undercurrent, if you will, of anti-Masonic feeling in the United States and throughout the world. Now, I think some of it has now been clothed in various religions that have been anti-Masonic or not taken a favorable stance towards Freemasonry. I think that the undercurrent, if you will, of what maybe allowed the Morgan affair to occur is still possibly there. And I've always kind of said, and this is one of my arguments for why I want men to, live our obligation, not just within the lodge, but also more importantly outside of it, because I always have felt that we're just one bad event away from another potential Morgan affair. And especially news can travel almost instantaneously through various outlets. I think even more so, it's important to take a lesson away from the Morgan affair. And that lesson needs to be that, to Steve's point, we need to always kind of act like DeWitt Clinton did towards Morgan. And if there is somebody who is questioning, Freemasonry that you may know personally, that you extend kindness to them. That having Freemasonry be so near and dear to myself and others, I know both of you guys are very much, what I consider mentors and, paragons of Freemasonry in my humble opinion. But I also know that because you have this attitude, you walk the walk, so to speak, and so I think that's the lesson that needs to be taken away from all of this is that, something like the Morgan affair could potentially happen again. All it takes is a Freemason acting very badly, doing something very bad, and that getting recorded, that getting disseminated, that getting passed instantaneously. And I think before you know it, we would be probably in a worse shape than maybe Freemasonry was during the Morgan affair. We need to use what happened as a lesson and try to make sure that we are always acting on the level and Greg, you and I, and I'm sure Steve has done this as well in Missouri, we always sit through the part of Grand Lodge when they do the jurisprudence report, and you go through all the people who have been kicked out of Masonry for committing felonies and all those horrible crimes that they've committed. And, it just reinforces that fact to me that yeah, we as Masons, we need to always kind of mind our P's and Q's, and we need to understand that we represent the fraternity at all times.
Darren, the book went ahead and got published. Everything they did that caused all this trouble was for nothing.
Right.
And the lesson that I can compare it to, and to me, it's almost just too apparent to bring up. There is a certain Masonic degree that Masons listening in will recognize immediately when a group of guys does a very terrible thing and it backfires on them, and they tell each other, we have killed this guy and we have failed to accomplish our purpose. Well, the Masons back then, in an almost direct parallel, caused all this trouble and almost ruined Masonry and failed to accomplish their purpose. And you are absolutely right. We can take lessons from what happened.
So, Steve, the book is now obviously in print. I know if you're a member of the Missouri Lodge of Research, it'll be the 2025 member book, so maybe that's a good reason to join. Otherwise, where can people find your book? How can we'll put these in the show notes too if there's links and things, but how can someone get this book into their hands?
I have had some issues with the bureaucracy at Amazon, so at least for now, I have a copy of the book, many copies for sale on eBay, where it's a lot easier to get things on. And the URL for that, I've got a tiny URL for it.
Okay.
It's tinyurl/Morgan. So I will email that to you guys. If you have show notes, you can put it in. You can do that. I'm also planning a number of presentations, even in other states. I've got some of them lined up. I won't go through them, but if you're in the area at the time, then the book is $25. I had to make it $30 on eBay because of all the ups and extras that eBay charges you. But if you happen to be in an area where I'm giving one of those presentations, I will most likely have traveled with books, and then there won't be at least any shipping. And I'll be passing through your area 1st of May, because I will be speaking at what do they call it now? The Masonic event that's going to be happening in Indianapolis.
The Midwest Conference on Masonic Education.
Masonic Education.
That's it. So we'll be doing more at that convention and traveling to other places. I'm on a couple of other Masonicons already, and if I'm in your area, I'll be happy to give you a signed copy.
So, we're very privileged to have Steve. This is kind of the kickoff of his, I'll call it his publicity tour or whatever, or I got all these books and I need to move them sale or one or the other. And even at $30, this book is a steal. The amount of research he has put into this won't be replicated anytime soon again, I think, on the Morgan Affair. And he has left us, being the fraternity, really, I think, an amazing gift of, again, going back, reading early parts of our history, understanding as you and Darren have kind of outlined the impact of today, not only on Freemasonry, but greater society. I want to encourage people to get it. Another thing, Steve, I noticed in the book, and for all of us sort of Masonic folks, there's a lot of names in there you'll recognize from the current day, because you had several people. Darren and I played just a little tiny part, but others were reviewing manuscripts, and they give some reviews. I think that's pretty cool too, that you've got a large group of people from the present day that are sort of included in the book, even though the time frame of it was 200 years ago.
First of all, don't underestimate your contribution, but I had a lot of help with this book. There are about 20 names in the front of the book of people that in one way or another helped me put this thing together. And you say there are a lot of friends of ours. the guys on the Masonic Roundtable were very helpful, and other people as well. And I also tried to include, and in fact did include, people who were not Freemasons to get their opinion on what this book might mean to them, and was there just too much Masonry? And I don't know, the consensus came out pretty good.
Yeah. Darren, kind of let you ask any other final questions or thoughts you might have for Steve as we look towards wrapping up this episode.
No, I'm just excited to dig into it, Steve. And, one of the benefits of having you as a friend is I have your email and your phone number. So if I have questions, I can contact you directly. But in all seriousness, I'm just thumbing through it to Greg's point, just the amount of work that I know this took. It's honestly an inspiration for me to get my duff and gear and finish my book. So I'm going to get on doing that, because I think, just being just so inspired by the book and just knowing the backstory and really being a passion project for you, it's kind of reinvigorating for me. So I thank you for writing it, honestly, and thank you for your friendship and your mentorship.
Well, I want to echo what Darren just said, Steve. You've been a great friend of ours for a long time now, but I want to thank you I think it's a gift to the fraternity and to society in general that you put all this stuff together. So deeply appreciate all your work. And then, as you mentioned, you're available for speaking engagements, and I think those will ramp up, obviously, as people get knowing that the book is out there. The one thing about Steve, he's also a great presenter. So he's not only a great author, but he's a great presenter, because I've seen him present. And Steve, you present the one of the reasons I like your writing style is that it's, though, you could argue it could be an academic book. It's not written like an academic book, though. You're a storyteller. And I think that's what helps set you apart from probably others that have written on the Morgan Affair, is you've written it in a style that I think all of us can relate to, regardless of where we're at in Masonry or life. So I want to thank you for that. Any other closing thoughts, Steve, you've got, or anything else we wanted to touch on that we didn't hit?
Well, first of all, I appreciate all those kind words. No, people just need to know that this book, I tried to be as thorough as possible. And in a way, you can say it's about a lot more than the Morgan Affair. It's the causes and effects that came about. And when you start reading the book, you don't even really meet William Morgan until chapter 3. So there's a lot before and after that occurred that I really wanted to cover that I didn't think had been ever covered in a single source before. So it's kind of been a labor of love, and I hope now I have the opportunity to get out, make presentations, and meet a lot of brothers and talk about it.
Well, we're excited for that part. I got to ask, what's your next project? I know you've got something in mind, whether you can tell us or not. I'm sure there's some ideas brewing in there. It's like, maybe I should go look at this.
I have not completely decided yet, because I'm still honing presentations over this and trying to work through the Amazon bureaucracy and things like that. I got a couple things in the back of my mind, but right now it's still the Morgan Affair.
Great. Well, again, we want to deeply say thank you for coming on tonight and being kind of giving us the exclusive to kind of help roll your book out. I want to encourage everyone to acquire this book. It's just, I kind of read through the first chapter just as we were talking here. It's sort of a quick read in a way because of Steve's style, but yet all that information's there. And again, we appreciate it. So if you're a listener, we of course appreciate you as being one of our friends that listen to Meet, Act, and Part. We'll welcome Roger Van Gordon back on a future episode. And I know he's been busy, like I said, getting us some future guests. We're going to have Steve on again sometime, probably later this year. I'll be kind of curious to see after you've gotten the book out, what reaction of people is. I think that's equally important, because that's sort of part of the book too, was the reaction of certain rumors, untruths, or whatever. And I'll be curious to see what the broader reaction to the book is. So again, Steve, thank you for joining us on another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part.